Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lauren Gilbert. I'm the Senior Manager for Public Services here at the Center for Jewish History. I would like to thank Shakespeare and Company Booksellers for co-sponsoring this event with us today. And a little later, I'll share a link to purchase a signed copy of the book through their website, and Julie will even personalize a copy of the book for you if you like. If you tuned in a little earlier, you saw a slideshow of upcoming events, and you can sign up for any of our upcoming programs at the calendar on our website, cjh.org. We are still holding our events remotely, but the center's reading room has reopened to researchers by appointment on a limited schedule, and exhibitions will be opening to the public this coming Monday with free time tickets, and there's more information about all of that on our website. You'll see that the chat is disabled for participants, so please put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll get to the questions at the end, as many as we have time for, but you can type them in as we go along. We'll try to wrap up today's program in about an hour. It is being recorded and will be available for viewing on the center's website and YouTube page in a couple of weeks. And if you registered for the event, you will receive an email with a link to the recording. Okay, so let's get started with today's program. Let me introduce today's speakers. I will start with our interviewer, Jennifer Mendelsohn. Jennifer began her career as a journalist and ghostwriter. A former Washington, D.C.-based special correspondent for People, she also wrote the satirical Keeping Tabs column for Slate. Her work has appeared in numerous local and national publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, USA Today, the Los Angeles Times, and McSweeney's. In addition, she is the author of a children's book and helped fashion guru Carson Kressley pen his New York Times best-selling men's style manual, Off the Cuff. A native Long Islander, now based in Baltimore, Mendelsohn is a member of the Association of Professional Genealogists, serves on the board of the Jewish Genealogy Society of Maryland, and is the administrator of Facebook's Jewish Genetic Genealogy Group. She is also the creator of Resistance Genealogy, a project that uses genealogical and historical records to fight disinformation and honor America's immigrant past. Her work has received international media attention. And our author today, Julie Klam, grew up in Bedford, New York. After attending NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and interning at Late Night with David Letterman, she went on to write for such publications as Oh, the Oprah Magazine, Rolling Stone, Harper's Bazaar, Glamour, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and for the VH1 television show Pop-Up Video, where she earned an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Special Class Writing. The almost legendary Morris Sisters is her sixth book. She lives in New York City with her family and a variety of cute dogs. So I will turn it over to the two of you, and I will come back for the Q&A.
Thank you so much for having us, Lauren. Julie, hi from Baltimore.
And I hope your weather holds out.
We had a little bit of a scare this afternoon. There was a tornado watch, but we appear to be okay. If Annie M flies by, I will let you know. So first, I need to make a little confession to you and our audience. I have been a Julie Klam stan ever since, please excuse my daughter. I will never forget lying in bed, reading your book. And I had one of those, I was laughing so hard, I had to read out loud to my husband the passage where you talked about being in a 3-star hotel in Italy and being disappointed with the accommodations and likening it to your uncle having fought in Vietnam. So that being said, I was delighted that you have brought your writing talents and your hilarious sense of humor to the world of genealogy. So welcome aboard, and I'm gonna put it all out there. I loved this book, so thank you for having me to discuss it with you.
I'm thrilled, and you were like the little angel on my shoulder while I was writing this and trying to figure out what I was doing. Several times I would see you tweet something and be like, okay, I have to fix this. You know, the one big issue that we've discussed of name changes at Ellis Island that everybody confuses. But so I learned that from you, but I've been a huge fan of resistance genealogy. Me and everybody else. I actually had suggested that Jennifer have a crime fighting show, crime with genealogy, and I thought that was a great idea.
Well, we'll get to that later, because one of the things that's fascinating about this book is how do you write about the process of doing research? And you have made it so readable and so fun, which is fascinating. But okay, let's get started. I want to hear a little bit. I was fascinated to learn that this was actually an idea for a book that you had many years ago that you then tabled. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about what happened in the intervening years and what sparked this idea and what made you pick it up again later?
Well, I was planning to do this as my second book after Please Excuse My Daughter. And I had interviewed all of the people, the relevant people that were alive, and got great stories and contacted a few places, but there really wasn't a ton of information, and there definitely wasn't anything like, I mean, that would have been like 2009 or 10. I'm not sure when Ancestry started, but it wasn't much, if it was then. And so I had like done this proposal, and then I was thinking, how am I going to find these things? I had a 2-year-old, and my marriage was sort of dissolving. So it just seemed like too much travel, work intensive, something that I wasn't quite ready for. But it ended up being sort of a blessing, because I did decide to do this. I did 4 books after that, and then just came back to this, and I had this sort of trove of interviews from people who were no longer around. And I had, I mean, it was like, and then at the same time, I had this whole new world of genealogy that, lay people can sort of step into. So I thought there was a much better chance, or there was a chance, that I was going to find something or nothing. But at least, I was going to go for it finally. So that's how it kind of stopped and started again. And it really was all, perfect.
Maybe we should take a step back and introduce our audience to the legendary Morris sisters. Tell us who they were and what you knew about them growing up, and why you were inspired to write a book about them.
So when I was a kid, I mean, I think with everybody, we have like family stories that you hear. And I had heard a lot about these cousins of my grandmother's from her, and then, after she died, from other people. And the story was, there were these 4 sisters who came from Romania with their parents. The mother, they landed in Ellis Island, and then drove or took a train across the country. When they got to St. Louis, the mother went into childbirth, went into labor, and then died in childbirth. The father put the kids in an orphanage and continued on to Los Angeles because he wanted to be a movie director. And then the kids were so, that one of the daughters was this brilliant with numbers, ingenue. And she supposedly got a job with JP Morgan in Cincinnati, kind of far from St. Louis Orphanage, and worked for him, and was so great that he transferred her to New York, and she took her siblings with her, where she became, the first woman with the first Jewish woman with a seat on the stock exchange, and made millions of dollars. So, I know all families sort of, embellish things or tell the best of things. I had really no idea. So the first thing I did back in the early days was I bought a huge biography of JP Morgan. One of the things that my Aunt Claire told me was that she had an affair with JP Morgan and decorated his New York apartment. And so the first thing I did, I got the biography and I looked in the index and she was not in there. And then I started to read it and discovered that he, excuse me, he died when she was 12. He was in Rome and she was in the orphanage then. So so I was like, oh, you know, and then I thought, well, maybe it was JP Morgan Jr. And I actually went down that road, which was nothing either. And then I was sort of like, so what happened? I mean, she did make all this money. What happened? So you know, that was the first sort of like the chink that fell out of the armor, and
Right.
it was a very big
Followed
one.
by a huge thud.
Yeah, right. And then I just sort of was thinking, well, I want to tell this story. I'm not exactly sure the story I'm going to be telling, but you know, I realized that it was going to be a lot of surprises, more maybe than I even realized, but maybe I didn't realize there was going to be so many surprises, but it was.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. You've said, and it won't spoil too much for the audience, but you've said that 90% of what you had heard turned out to be untrue. So when you got started, did you think you were going to be sort of telling the fable that you had been heard, or did you sort of start to suspect that this might go in other directions?
So I think when I was working on the proposal for it, I thought I was going to be telling the story. I thought, you know, whatever the story of these 4 women who had nothing to do with men, they were never, you know, supposedly none of them were ever married. They all lived together. They never had anything to do with men. They hated men because of their father leaving in the orphanage. And I thought, you know, this is definitely relevant. How did somebody do this in the 1920s? You know, how does somebody do it, you know, in the 2020s? So I wanted to just sort of find out how they did what they did. And, you know, in the course of that, you know, really learned how little to nothing I knew about genealogy and researching that sort of thing. And luckily, you know, I kept running into these genealogists and, you know, family archivists and librarians who are like, you know, brilliant at it and helped me, you know, zero in a little bit. I mean, I talk about early in the book, I spent a full day at the New York Public Library in their genealogy room, and the only thing I found that day was the bathroom.
Which is a very helpful thing to know, but not what you were looking for.
I was really jazzed about it when I found that, and then, but it was like this, you know, that's not my, well, it wasn't my thing, and I had to sort of make it my thing. You know, I definitely, you know, if you ever go on ancestry.com, there's this like very tempting hire an expert button, you know, that I was thinking, well, if I did that, you know, somebody would know what they were doing and give me all the information. I just put it together. But I sort of thought that, you know, if I'm telling the story, I need to find the story, or it's going to be, you know, a story of me, you know, Googling things, and it wouldn't be a very interesting book. I think.
Well, I think you tapped into sort of what I personally feel is one of the lovely things about the genealogy community. There are so many sort of helpers along the way. I feel like it's like, you know, it's like the Wizard of Oz and the Yellow Brick Road, and there's always sort of kind people along the way giving you the heart and the courage that you need in different places. I mean, you found the most lovely people, like the woman at the orphanage in St. Louis, and, you know, the guide in Romania. And, you know, so it's sort of a team effort, and yeah. People, it's a very sort of generous community, which is nice and welcome in today's world, I think.
Oh, I mean, at first I was like, gosh, I'm really lucky. I keep hitting on the right people, but it was really that I never met anybody in any of the places that wasn't looking to help me as much as they could. And, you know, there are, as you know, there are things that you can't get easily, even if you have help, like there are records that are only available to the people who are in them, or, and finding any orphanage records is very difficult, especially if it's in a JC, the Jewish Family Services don't let those records go to anybody but the person in the records. And so I had to I talked to this expert on orphanages in St. Louis who worked at the St. Louis Genealogical Society. And she said,
Can I interrupt to say how great it is that there's a person who's an expert on orphanages in St. Louis? I mean,
and it's all volunteer,
right.
Like everybody, I went in this place, there were hundreds of people entering information, all volunteers. So she had written about it and I wanted to talk to her, and I ended up going and meeting her in St. Louis and going all over the place with her, but she told me to contact this archive collection. They had not records and couldn't get records, but they had other bits of information, and I was able to see the minutes from the orphanage when the girls came in at various times and when they were there and being switched. And I mean, that was just like mind blowing. I think it gave me chills because they were, it was all typed out, and this great sort of, warmth from the people. This was the board of the orphanage, wonderfully warm people talking about how they could make the home more homey for these orphan children, and ice cream in the summer or whatever it was. So it was really, really neat, and that was as close as I could come to orphanage records, but it was kind of enough. It had to be enough.
So again, without sort of getting into the details and giving away the sort of surprises that you uncovered along the way, suffice it to say that there was a lot of mythologizing going on in your family. I'm curious about a couple things. First, I'm curious, how much of that do you think came from the sisters themselves? Were they promoting a sort of elaborated version of their backstory, or do you think it was just sort of the way that they were perceived, or was it a reason that they were so misunderstood is not the right word, but mischaracterized?
I think some of it came from them, and some of it came from the sort of telephone game that telling stories becomes. One of the, there were a lot of things like there were things that in those days were embarrassing or shameful that today we wouldn't look at that way. There were, they were not, they lived in the Village in New York and had a place in Southampton, which is like this very fancy place. They weren't, a Boston Brahmin family. They were really, they were from a very tiny town in Romania. And then, the minute they got to this country, they were in an orphanage. So they definitely there was a lot of shame, I think, that surrounded their story and what they told. And then there were a couple of people in their inner circle who knew more, who knew some of the truths. And the people that had a lot of the truths also got a lot of things wrong because, it just didn't, if something doesn't if somebody says a name to you that doesn't mean anything, you're not going to remember it. You're going to, so that a lot of it is like that kind of thing. So I think it was a combination. And, one of the things that I found since this book has been published is that so many families have this long, the person will say, I have this story. This is what I heard about my family. And some of them are, kind of like, I'm not really sure if my uncle was a hero at, Custer's last stand, but that's what our family heard. Or, my uncle, uncovered a zillion dollars, in the gold rush, but he buried it somewhere. But there's this map, it's like all kinds of crazy things. Or, somebody who says their grandfather was a sea captain, and then when they went looking into it, they worked, as a, swab down person. That's
they worked at a Long John Silver's.
right, exactly.
But I mean, that's the whole process. I mean, you sort of got a baptism by fire in genealogy by learning that so much of what we've heard, when you actually go to see the paper trail, it doesn't hold up. And there's a great, I saw Henry Louis Gates speak at the International Jewish Genealogy Conference a couple of years ago, and he said he was talking to two different celebrities that were going to be on his show, Finding Your Roots, and in succession, they each told him the same exact story that they said had happened to their great grandmother. And so, so you have to take everything with a grain of salt. But now that you have come through and you have a deeper understanding of sort of what the quote unquote truth about the sisters is, I'm curious, is the crown off? Is it sad to sort of see the truth, or was the truth more interesting in its own way?
I think one of the things you obviously find when you're doing genealogy is that people jump off the paper and become real. You suddenly know what they were going through. You see their names on, their naturalization papers and what the information they filled out. And you can almost feel, the fear in certain of these, looking at these documents and knowing so much more of what they went through. I found these were people that I fell in love with, and they became my people, from, instead of being, my grandmother's cousins, they're now, my Morris sisters. And I'm connected to them, and I know all of this. So it was definitely not disappointing. It was, emotional and heartwarming and very sad. But it was, I was a tiny bit disappointed. A couple of the, really, there was a story that that this one sister advised FDR, and I really tried to find that information, and I did not. And I'm not saying she definitely didn't, because I only have evidence that doesn't say that she did. But I was really looking forward to finding that. I thought, something like that you would find. It's like, if there were so many things about them, the way they lived, where they were off the radar. And their last name was Morris. So finding them in places was like, finding a Morris in a haystack. I think that I definitely grew fonder and fonder, and,
What about the rest of your family? Because one of the things that I personally find all the time is that sometimes the sort of true information that you present to people, which is at odds with the myths that they have believed, they get very, very defensive and do not want to accept what you have found. Has your family welcomed the revised Morris sisters myth with open arms, or some people sort of I liked it better when she had an affair with JP Morgan?
When she was the first, she was
10.
Stock exchange then also.
Details, Julie, details.
Really, no one, exactly. No one has been disappointed. Everybody's been extremely interested. And I think part of the reason is because we are all much farther away than the people who were first, much further down the line than the people who were first involved with it. I had an uncle who, when he went on, he joined a firm, and he said he kept saying her name, Marcella Morris, expecting people to be like, you're related to Marcella Morris, and no one had heard of her. And this was in the 50s or 60s when she was sort of still doing things. So, I think that probably was disappointing to him, but finding out, the story now is everybody's excited. And, I did stuff that nobody had done before, which is going to Romania, which I think I'm probably the only one who will have done that trip, and that was hugely informative, and everybody loved looking at the photos and hearing the stories, and that was a good thing. So so far, I mean, I haven't heard from any disappointed people. I'm sure they're out there. It's only been a week that the book's been out.
So let's talk about going to Romania. I feel like there's a very small percentage probably of American Jews who have had the experience of going back to Eastern Europe, Ashkenazi Jews that is, to our ancestral places. As you know, I am actually also one of them. And I'm curious, I mean, did that trip, seeing, where your family originated, did it change your perspective on being a Jew? Did it change your life? Did it, what was it like to see those places?
Well, it's so interesting to me because, I mean, my grandparents and my parents and my grandparents were born here. So I've always sort of thought of New York as my ancestral home. Bloomingdale's actually, no. So when we were doing this, what I wanted to do was go see this town, and I had no idea. I had contacted a Romanian genealogist who was in a totally different part of Romania, who had gone to the towns to, go through the records, which, whether I'd been there or not, it's all, handwritten in their language. I couldn't have read it or known what anything was. So he went like 3 months before I did. And I knew there was something there. That every one of their documents has, which I'm sure you find, different bits of information, the town is a different town. It's spelled completely different. Their dates are different, everything. So I was like, and when I told the 2 towns that I'd found through, Ancestry and all of these other things, the people in my family were like, no, that wasn't it. It was a town called something else that I'd never heard of or come across anywhere. But then, this guy found that. And so I went to the town and I found it incredibly moving. I mean, I started in Bucharest and heard the history of Jews in Romania. I mean, I had read things, but seeing like the number that were there before, the Holocaust, and the numbers there now, it's, takes your breath away. And the towns, I think there's something like 8 Jews total in all of the towns in this area of Romania. And so the synagogues that they went to are exactly, they're left as they were. They could have gotten up from shul and walked out, and that's what it would have looked like. It was, crumbling, but beautiful. I mean, just unbelievably beautiful. And I went to these 2 synagogues, and there was, he wasn't a rabbi, he's that runs the temples. So that really made me in touch with, that made me feel so much more like who I am than any other sort of, trip back home. I went to this restaurant and it was like being in my grandmother's house. I mean, it smells like it, and the colors of the fabrics. And you realize when these people come from these countries, they're bringing almost nothing. I always sort of imagine them with like a bindle stick with a polka dot handkerchief, but they had their recipes and their rituals and their, the way their smells and things. And I think that's what I kind of got when I was there. They couldn't bring all of their stuff, but that kind of intangible thing. So that was, I loved it.
It's very centering, isn't it? It gives you sort of a real perspective.
Yeah.
that we didn't just land here.
Right, sprout.
On a sober note, I'll tell you that one of the most sort of shattering experiences I had in Eastern Europe was seeing the synagogue in the town next to where my family is from. And it was known in the day as the Great Synagogue. And when we were there in August of 2001, the outer walls were still there, but the roof was gone. So there were trees growing in the middle of the sanctuary and animals grazing. And I just like that image when you sort of think through all the steps that have to happen to have a synagogue, have trees growing in the middle and animals grazing. I'll never forget it. But so did you come back with a renewed faith or Jewish cultural interest, or?
I mean, definitely. I think that, I've always, definitely thought of myself as an Eastern European Jew from somewhere, but being there and sort of talking to them and telling them that my family came from there, and, being in this town and imagining my family walking around there. The towns are so small and so abandoned that, you really can feel like they were just there. It's not like you go there and there's McDonald's. They're like these houses, and, and I talk a lot about the cemeteries there, the town happens to be a place where there's a lot of earthquakes. So even if there hadn't been the Holocaust and communism coming in and taking all of these, taking away all of their religious items, these cemeteries were it was like in a apocalypse movie. Like, you walk through and the stones were just shattered, and there were bones on the ground because of animals that died there. It was like, and of course it was like a gray day, and I was walking through there, and before I came in, I had taken a bunch of stones because I wanted to put stones on anyone's stone that I could find, anyone's grave. And it was very hard to find anyone standing, and let alone, I don't read Hebrew, but I took pictures, but it was so hard to see. So, it was, that was my real bat mitzvah.
Everyone should go to Romania. There are no favors, but, what was your theme? It was Romanian Holocaust. No, but the theme. So the other thing I'm very curious about, whether you've had a transformation, is I saw you say recently in an interview, now you only want to write books like this. Does that mean you have been converted to the Genealogy Tribe, or you only want to write books about your family? Or, some people are like genealogists from day one. I don't know about you. I was definitely not that kid who was interested. Some of us come to it later in life and then it sticks. And some of us, like my brother Daniel, who many people know wrote a very important Jewish genealogy book, has sort of stepped away. He wrote his book, he told his story, he's done. So do you have the bug now?
I loved being involved with the history and finding the materials. And, luckily a lot of this was before the pandemic, because I was able to go to New York Historical Society and, Hyde Park and all of these places and go through, very carefully looking and touching these things. And I definitely was bitten by the bug. And I am starting on another book that my grandfather was in the Hebrew orphan asylum in Brooklyn. And so I've been starting to pull together things to write about that next. And, that's where the wonderful Center for Jewish History comes in, because they have all their records. So anyway, yeah, no, I do. I love it. I love the history stuff. I'm a memoirist, so I've written a lot of books about myself. There's not much left to say, and nobody in my family nobody alive wants me to write about them anymore. So
do you think the one thing we learn in genealogy is that sometimes you think the story is over and it's not. Do you think there's a chance that, sort of the Morris sisters story might have another chapter or coda or something?
I was thinking that. I've been thinking about that because, I definitely, I left no stone that I knew about unturned, but, I knew when I was writing this book that part of the thing is I was this normal human being doing this. I wasn't a genealogist doing this. So I probably was going to miss things, though I kept showing my work to genealogists to make sure I didn't miss something. But this happens in every Zoom I go.
Is the story still evolving?
Oh yes, the story is still evolving. Thank you, Jen. I feel like definitely this weekend I'm going out to Southampton where they live, to the library there to do an event, and I'm no doubt they died in the 90s. Somebody must have known them and will have information. And I kind of think if I find like really cool things, it would be fun to put that in the paperback. It's definitely evolving, and one of the things is that the census reports are. They end, they don't, it's not like we can, so the most recent ones that I was looking at were, I guess, 1940 or 1930. 1940. So, I'm sure there's a ton of information in 1950, 60, 70, 80, that would be.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, I was just saying, I won't be able to get to that.
Genealogy geeks know we have a party planned for April of 2022, which is when the 1950 census is coming online. So get your ducks in a row and, get your margarita ready. We're all going to party up and look at the 1950 census because that's what we do.
Oh, that is fun.
So I suspect we probably have a lot of people in the audience who are not just Julie Klam fans, but people interested in their own family history. And I'm curious, do you think that there is a Morris sisters story in everybody's family that can be teased out? Or what sort of responses have you gotten from people who've read the book? Is everyone trying to tell you about the Morris sister and their family tree?
I definitely find that there are people that are, that have stories that they're now interested in figuring out how to go about finding. I have a friend that has just started, after she read my book, searching for things. And, your mind is blown when you find the first, picture of your grandfather, your grandfather's draft card or whatever sort of thing. And I think that there's like no one who I don't know who isn't interested in sort of going somewhat there. I don't think everyone wants to blow the lid off their mythology, and not everybody's is mythology. I think that my family had a particularly heavy amount of error, fiction wrapped up, but yeah, I think it's such a great thing for people to do. If you don't have a book due, you can take it as long as you like and just enjoy it.
One of the things that you encountered along the way that you write a lot about, we talk in genealogy about hitting brick walls. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the process you used, and maybe we should explain what a brick wall is and sort of how you got around them?
Why don't you explain the brick wall, and I'll tell you how I got around them.
A brick wall is just what it sounds like when you have sort of a research problem or a person that you have tried absolutely everything to find out about them and you are just stuck. I had one with a great grandmother who never did any of the things that would have allowed me to get a bead on where she was from beyond, quote, Russia, unquote. And it took a DNA match to break down that brick wall because she left no evidence on paper as to where she was from. So it's definitely a huge part of genealogy to deal with them and get around them. And I'm curious if you can tell people how you dealt with them.
Well, I had the brick wall, I had brick walls and I would think I have to quit. It was like, I don't know what else to do. And then, you know, so much of it is just sort of keeping at it. And, or, you know, I would go on the Reddit genealogy page and ask people if they had ideas, and everyone does. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. You know, there was one thing where everybody said to me at one point, I was trying to find something out, and they said, oh, well, it's too bad you don't have their wills, because then you could see their death certificates. And I said, oh, I actually have this huge package of their wills. I just never looked through it like that because I'm me. I was like, oh, that's a will. It tells who things I didn't know. And then I looked and I find their death certificates with so much information. And it was like, you know, a lot of like light bulbs that went on for me are probably already on for other people that would have known that. But, you know, I really, I mean, you know, so some of them were brick walls, and, you know, and sometimes you get through the brick wall and you think you're there, and then there's actually like a stone wall behind the brick wall and a, you know, and a cement door behind that. But, you know, I think you just keep knocking at it, and sometimes it just stays there. You know, sometimes it's like a problem. You like, it's good to just leave it and work on another problem and come back to it.
Sometimes it just takes a set of fresh eyes. And sometimes those eyes are your own, just after some time has passed and you suddenly sort of see what you didn't see before, and the light bulb goes off, and you know, you can get it all done. But you said that genealogy is like searching for buried treasure. I get the sense that this was a really fun book to write. Like,
I mean, I was so excited at everything I found. And I really, I can't imagine anyone wouldn't be. And I think that when, especially because a lot of it was not being found. And then when I would find something, I would say, okay, it looks like I'm going to be able to write this book after all. You know, I loved it. I loved going everywhere, walking through places, you know, hearing the guide in Romania explain to me that, you know, the way, you know, that poor people didn't leave that town. They had to have had some money to get out of there. If they had nothing, they would have been, you know, remained there. And, you know, the way that they got out, you know, I mean, you know, it's 1900. How are they traveling from this little teeny town in Romania to Southampton, England, where the boat was, you know, a lot on foot, things like that, which, you know, you just don't imagine, or, you know, I didn't imagine. I guess a lot of other people did imagine that, but it was all very, you know, mind blowing to me and unbelievable, and really brought to home. You know, I wrote about the Ellis Island Museum, which has always been a hugely important place to me. I always love to go there because it really puts things into relief. You feel like you're going through, you know, a level of what these immigrants went through, and hearing how they, you know, what, I mean, I just imagine how unbelievably terrifying it was. And it sort of makes the difficulties in my own life feel a lot more manageable.
You said that being in Romania gave you some of that sense of what it must have been like to be sort of in an unfamiliar place, not speaking the language. Like,
yeah,
that was a really interesting insight to me.
You know, my husband and I travel a tremendous amount, and wherever we go, there's, you know, a fair amount of people who speak some English. You know, this town, nobody spoke English, and I was so happy about that. I mean, I had a translator with me, but it wasn't, you know, I was sitting there listening to these long speeches, having no idea what the person said. And that was something that you know, you really don't often experience in your day to day. So that was very cool, I thought.
Yeah. Now that it's all done, I mean, have you given a thought, I'm sure you have, to what the Morris sisters would think of the book? Do you think they'd be amused that they are the subjects of a memoir in the year 2021?
I think they would be initially scared, that, you know, their stuff was out there, and then very happy because they are being loved by, you know, the New York Times and stuff like that. I think they would have been happy about that. You know, I'm sure that if I had been like my age and talking to them in their later years, I would have gotten a much better sense of that. But I could tell there were some, they gave a lot of money to Brandeis University, and there were some papers from Brandeis, and I read how they talked, and they were very excited to share their life story with the people, you know, the Brandeis gifting people. So I think they did like have an interest in their story being told.
Have you given any thought to what you would want your cousin's granddaughter to one day write about you? Do you think there are family myths going to brew about?
As they are, you know, they look through my, you know, my search history on Google, and they'll be like, okay, she ordered a lot of dog food, and she the same dress on sale 7,000 times and never bought it. And, you know, now she's like on Twitter again and whatever. I think that like we have left the opposite. We have left so much behind that, you know, I don't think anybody has to write a book. They'll just, you know, be able to sit down and Google me and send the link of my things to everybody. Just
the genealogist in 2070 will be looking at your LinkedIn like it's a holy document. Like, oh my goodness, she
like, and you're, you know, that's such a perfect example, because like you have things that online that you're like, you see now, and it'll say like, and she's married to my first husband, who I'm not married to anymore, and I never bothered to go in and change that information. And, you know, it still says I work at a place I didn't, you know, it's so right. All of those things. And then they'll be there going like, oh, this, you know, it still says the other husband's name. Maybe they were, you know, secretly still married and not incredibly lazy. But yeah.
I always say genealogy sometimes makes me feel like an archaeologist, but like instead of pottery shards, you're using documents to try to reconstruct a person's life and have it make sense. And sometimes it doesn't make sense, and that's so confusing, but it does feel a little bit like you're, you know, sort of digging. But I really want to know, I know that at one point in the book, you went so far as to consult a medium, and you are not the first person on a genealogical inquiry to do that. I want you to know that there is a whole world of people who believe that that is the answer. But I'm very curious, if you could sit down with the sisters, what would be the first thing you would want to hear directly from them?
You know, when I talked to the medium, I wanted facts. I wanted dates and addresses where I could find the materials. You know, I thought that I was going to get like a printout, you know. And the thing one of the things the medium said was, they know you're writing this book, and they said, don't make us like Grey Gardens. Don't make us look silly. And I actually, I didn't know whether, I don't know whether they were there or not, but it made sense as some kind of a request from them. So I probably would, I mean, I have so many questions for them. And I first I would just say, are you mad at me?
Well, maybe that's a good place to end and take some questions. Although what I want to say, the genealogy teacher in me feels like that is a perfect example of how to start. Somewhere in the audience, there is a person who has a Morris sister in their life who is alive right at this moment, who you could pick up the phone and call. So that is always the first step in the genealogical process. Talk, ask questions, interview, and get to those old people while you can. So there's always good
when they're dead. So
I didn't hear you.
I said it's much harder to talk to them when they're dead.
Much. I mean, it's doable, but it takes an extra step.
Okay, thanks. We do have a few questions that came in while you were talking. One for you, Julie. What was the name of the little town in Romania?
Focșani. there was a town next to it called, I think it's pronounced Riminiku Sorat. They're in Moldova, but Fokshani was the main one.
Someone named Gloria, her mother grew up at the St. Louis in the Jewish Children's Home, and would love to know the name of the woman who was so helpful.
Email me through my website, and I will give you all that information, because I'm not sure. This was like 4 years ago. I'm not even sure she's still there, but I can give you the place and all of that. And she's the man.
And it's julieklam.com, right?
Yeah, at julieklam.com, there's a contact thing, and it says, contact me for anything that other people can't do. I will do.
A question, what happened to the cruel father who left the sister? Did any sister ever see their father again? You didn't get into too many of the details about what you actually discovered. Right.
It wasn't what they said. He didn't leave them and go to Los Angeles. He was in St. Louis the whole time. I think there was a lot more to his story than that. That was a big myth, that he was this, evil father. He wasn't, I don't think.
A question to Jennifer, what was your family town? My town also had a great synagogue with only walls and a tree growing in the middle.
Oh, well, I wonder if there's more than one. Well, my family is from Balakov, which is in Western Ukraine in what was Galicia, but the synagogue was in Stry, which is very close to Balakov. And perhaps it's the same one. I'm happy to say the trees are gone. They've now put a gate and a fence around the synagogue and restored it a bit. We were there 20 years ago, so.
And this is just a comment telling people to always relook at documents you found a long time ago. You'll find new info you didn't notice or didn't know how important it was before.
Absolutely, yes.
I'll add to that one of the things that's fascinating about genealogy is sort of the more you know, the more you can know, because certain, like that comment said, you may not recognize a name early on in your quest, say the name of like a witness on a naturalization or something. And after you've done research, you're like, oh my God, that was the maiden name of my great grandmother. So that is likely a relative who witnessed, who is that person? And it's exciting because you sort of, I always say it's like an episode of Law and Order. You follow the dun-duns, like each new piece of information opens the door to more information. And that's sort of personally the most exciting part.
Also, in addition to that, the documents can be so crowded with information that you don't take it all in. And especially if you're looking at them on a screen, it's like I had never found a second page until this woman sort of helped me find it, where that was a lot of answers that I didn't realize there was a second page to this ship's manifest. So.
And sometimes they come in the most surprising places. I have many times told the story of ordering my great-grandfather's AR2, which is a form that his alien registration form that he filled out because he never became a citizen. And I got it just solely for the purposes of housekeeping. Like I knew exactly where he was from. I knew his birthday. I knew when he came. I just thought it would be a good thing to have. And when I got the file, there was a handwritten letter in it signed by my great aunt, my grandmother's sister. And I'm sort of reading it, and it says, it's come to my attention that in the process of filling out the form, my father misanswered the question about an arrest record. And of course, what immediately went through my head, because I'm a goody two-shoes, and I thought my whole family was too, was, oh, he didn't speak English and he must have like misunderstood the question about arrest. But when you keep reading, it says he was arrested for grand larceny in the summer of 1940, and the case is still pending and will go to trial next year. And I just like fell out of my chair. And this was like not in a, I wasn't looking for criminal documents. This was like in an immigration paperwork. So you just have to be like a sponge. And I'm also a huge proponent of like, get everything. Don't just assume that like get every single document, because you just never know where that next good nugget is going to be hiding.
Julie, a question about the sisters. What are their most important achievements? Did you find out about them?
Well, the thing that I found out was that they were these 4 individual people. One of them was a playwright, and there was this whole story with her being where she was suing Yip Harburg, who wrote, Somewhere Over the Rainbow and Paper Moon, and NBC for stealing this thing of hers. And I did find all of that, and I found those bits of her achievements. Marcella, the financial one, the only thing I ended up with was all the stocks that she owned at the end and how much money she had. And that, from talking to people, realized that she probably had a trading account as an assistant and did everything that way. And she was never, until, she was in like her 70s. So I found as much as there was, and stuff that I didn't expect to find.
And you found a room that is named after them at the Southampton Library, right?
That's right. With the biography up on the wall, probably like that's a perfect document of misinformation. It's very charming.
Someone says my town is Folksani also, and I've also paid someone to research how do we reach you, but I guess you've said through your website, julieklam.com.
Yeah, and I'm all over social media. I'm very easy to find, but yes, definitely email me through my website. And
someone's asking for Jennifer's email address. They can also contact you through your website, Jennifer?
The best way to contact me is resistancegenealogy@gmail.com.
Okay, resistancegenealogy@gmail.com. And someone else is saying never toss anything. Just another bit of advice, never toss anything.
We should give a plug, Lauren, the lovely genealogy librarians at CJH. Can you, I don't know if you're equipped to talk about, I know they go online. Is it on Fridays to answer questions?
Yes, thank you. We have 2 specialist genealogy librarians here at the Center for Jewish History who have been available via email at gi@cjh.org, as well as now we're doing monthly genealogy coffee breaks on Facebook, covering a whole lot of general information, genealogy research topics. And you can see all the past episodes as well on the center's Facebook page. And as I mentioned, the reading room is now open once again. So we look forward to seeing any of you who are here in New York. And and also I'm going to put a link in the chat to just a quick survey that helps us plan future programs. If you don't mind, it's just a few multiple choice questions. I'd like to thank you both for participating today, Jennifer and Julie, and thanks so much. And again, I recommend that you all buy the book, which you can get signed from Shakespeare and Company, and Julie says she will personalize it as well.
That's right. I'll say whatever you want.
Thanks a lot, both of you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.